And you guys can see the, great.
Hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started in just about a minute, but want to make sure everyone who is joining us can join us. So sit tight for just another minute or so, and we will be with you soon. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Diani Figa. I'm the Director of Preservation Services at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. My pronouns are she and her. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to this third in our dialogue series around various issues of diversity and inclusion in the field of collections care. As with the previous sessions, as with all of our sessions, I'm largely going to turn this over to our facilitator for the sessions, Sarah Ferrone, but I do have a few pieces of housekeeping before we begin. First off, I want to extend huge thanks to our primary funder for this initiative, the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I know there are some new names here today who have not joined us for the previous session. So let me give just a very quick overview of the structure of these sessions. So we at the Conservation Center developed the idea for these programs in the hopes to contribute to some of the other incredibly significant work being done in the field toward building a DEIA infrastructure within collections care that can be sustainable beyond this moment in history. The goal for these sessions and conversations is not to present definitive answers or even any sort of definitive guidebook on the topics, but rather to work on building the guide together as a community. So each session focuses on a different issue facing the field and will be comprised of two components: a traditional webinar with a speaker or two highlighting their own observations in the field, that's today, and then the following day, tomorrow, a community dialogue led by our facilitator. As each topic is discussed and processed together, key takeaways will be compiled and used to build a publicly available resource document to serve as a toolkit for individuals looking to begin or expand this work at their own organizations. The toolkit for session 1 is already available online, and the toolkit for session 2 will be available soon. And we will be sharing the links for those as they're developed. So logistics and housekeeping. First off, if you would like to follow along with closed captions, you may need to activate that setting within your Zoom interface. Toward the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a box that says CC live transcript. Click that and then click show subtitle. There may be a lag, but then subtitles should appear. Today's event is set up as a webinar, which among other things means that participants cannot actually speak and interact beyond typing in the chat box. Don't fret, tomorrow will be set up as a meeting, so we'll all be able to have a healthy discussion, and I'll give you some more housekeeping tips on navigating that when we meet tomorrow. But for today, what that means is if you have questions for the speakers, please go ahead and enter those in the chat box. While our discussions tomorrow and on all the subsequent second days of sessions will not be recorded for issues of privacy, vulnerability, and the conversational tone we hope to strike, this initial content portion is being recorded, including anything contained in the chat box. We will also be creating a transcript through closed captions, which will be retained and available for all portions of the sessions. And we're retaining this information, for one thing, to aid in creation of the toolkit I mentioned. I will say more about this at the end of today's session as well as tomorrow, but I just wanted all of you to be able to get on your calendars now that the next event in this series will be on February 7th and 8th, when we will consider a somewhat different angle on institutional advocacy. And with that, I'm going to introduce and then turn things over to our facilitator, Sarah Ferrone. Sarah is the principal of Dialogic Consulting, where she brings over 20 years of facilitation and training experience to every project, helping make hard conversations productive and enabling teams to work together more effectively. In the interest of having a bit more time for content, I will forego the rest of her bio today and pass things along to Sarah.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I'm so looking forward to digging into our conversations today. I first want to acknowledge that I'm appreciative of the time and energy of Alana Schaefer, who will be taking notes during today's session, in addition to our recording. And along with Margalit Schindler are the primary authors of each session's toolkit. So a big nod of appreciation to both of them. I'm grateful this morning for many things and would like to acknowledge also the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home where I join you from today in northern New Jersey, the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands each of us sit, and the labor of people who were enslaved in constructing many of the institutions that we work for and with. But to get us started today, it is mainly my pleasure to introduce our colleagues and speakers for today's session, Margalit Schindler and Dr. Joelle Winkins. Margalit is currently a graduate fellow in preventative conservation at the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in art conservation and is spending their third-year fellowship with CCAHA. Margalit graduated from Kent State University in 2014 after studying art history and metalworking. Since then, they have worked for several conservation labs, including the Cleveland Museum of Art and ICA Art Conservation. They are working to combine preventative conservation and social justice, supporting traditionally marginalized collections by sharing information and empowering others. A passion for Jewish culture has led them to a focus in studying and impacting the preservation of Judaica in collections around the United States. Joelle is currently an assistant professor of preventative conservation in the Art Conservation Department at University of Delaware and the associate director of the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation. Her current work in preventative conservation is dedicated to evolving the practice of that specialty to place social, economic, and environmental sustainability at its core. She is a daughter, sibling, wife, parent, educator, mentor, student, facilitator, preventative conservator. Others identify her as disabled. She prefers phrases like uses a wheelchair to navigate when outside of her home. Today, Margalit and Joelle will share a case study of radical change in the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in art conservation, when 3 non-binary students joined the 2022 cohort. There was a need to educate and advocate for the understanding and use of gender-neutral pronouns. They will discuss the triumphs and struggles of this endeavor from both the student advocate and senior leadership perspectives, and in doing so, elucidate ways of advocating for personal needs within professional settings. With that being said, it is my distinct pleasure to turn the mic over to Margalit and Joelle.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. What wonderful and kind introductions. I realize that we both come from a program with quite a long-winded name. So thank you for taking the time to make note of all of the things that we are and bring to this conversation. So like Sarah said, my name is Margalit. I use they, them pronouns, which is part of the reason I'm here having this conversation with you today. And I am a member of the WUDPAC class of 2022 cohort. Here are my classmates back in the before times. It looks crazy to see everyone standing so close and without masks. Every year, the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation brings in 10 students as a cohort. They spend the first year kind of learning very intensely together. The second year, focusing more on their major and specific areas of study. And then the third year offsite, working a fellowship as a full-time employee for an institution. And really that first year of working together, especially pre-virtual and being in the same space all day, every day, really built a strong foundation. And together we came in strong and connected and were able to come together and with the leadership of Joelle and this program kind of do something amazing by just being ourselves. So out of the 10 of us, 7 folks use she, her pronouns and 3 folks use they, them pronouns. And I love to say that when our non-binary people 30% of anything, it's such a wonderful statistic. And I think a part of what made us so strong is that we were in it together and we had people standing in line on our side as we were moving forward. And so Joelle and I are here together as representatives of kind of 2 sides, 2 facets to this journey. I am here as a non-binary student advocating for my own rights and my own needs. And Joelle is here as the leader being in leadership while that's happening, while there are students coming and asking for change. And so we hope to share kind of a timeline of what happened, what worked well, what didn't work well, some feedback that we got during this journey, how we pivoted, and are happy to answer any questions if you have any, and look forward to the discussion tomorrow. Joelle, does that sound good to you? Great. So we kind of started with this timeline, and I first want to share that the timelines kind of happened at the same time in tandem, but with effects leading to from one to the other. It was very much a give and take between groups. And so from my understanding, the first kind of trigger thing that happened was at interviews, there was one student who introduced themselves with gender neutral pronouns during their interview. And by taking up that space, they made sure that it was noticed. And so Joelle, I'm going to pass the torch to you because your work comes after that.
Yep. Thank you, Marguerite. Thank you for setting the stage. I'm going to add 2 more things. One is that I noticed that in the audience, there are at least 3 members of your class present. And so I would love it if, as we go along or when this presentation is over, if you all have thoughts to share that either go along with or contradict your own personal experience in terms of how this all played out. It would be fabulous to add those voices to today's conversation or tomorrow's conversation. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. The other thing that I think is important for those of you who are not aware of what the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation is it's important to understand that it's a program that is sponsored by 2 institutions, the University of Delaware and the Winterthur Museum, Garden and Library. And they are 2 very different institutions. One is a I don't know, I'm not sure traditional is the right word, but one is a academic research institution, and the other is a museum that has been in existence since the 1950s. And both of those institutions bring different things to the program. The master students train on the campus at Winterthur Museum. They really aren't on the campus at the University of Delaware very often. And I would say that the Winterthur Museum is what we might identify as a more traditional museum with more traditional middle upper class white American values. And the University of Delaware is working towards being what they might define more progressive academic institution. And so those two backgrounds and those two existences play into the story that we have to tell. And I was fully employed by Winterthur Museum until the summer before this class started as students. And in that summer, I transitioned to full-time employment by the University of Delaware. And I bring that up because, yes, as Marguerite said, we had one student who introduced themselves using gender neutral pronouns at their interview, which would have been in March of 2018. And that was when we accepted that student into the program. That was an indication to us, okay, we need to be thinking about what are we going to do to be welcoming and inclusive to this student. Where are the gender neutral bathrooms? Oh, we don't really officially have any gender neutral bathrooms on the Winterthur campus. So how are we going to deal with that? And so we started thinking about that in April when we accepted that one student, not knowing that there would be three in the class who would come to join us. And then for me, the other thing that happened in that summer is when I transitioned from working at the Winterthur Museum to the University of Delaware, I went to my orientation. There were probably 80 of us there. And at that orientation, not everybody, but a lot of people were introducing themselves with their pronouns. It was the first professional meeting I'd been in where somebody introduced themselves with their pronouns. And it was an eye-opener for me, an exciting moment for me of, oh, I work for a very different institution now. My paycheck comes from an institution with very different expectations than those from Winterthur. And they expect me to be very proactive, very welcoming, very inclusive. And so what am I going to do to make sure that happens with our incoming class? It became very enabling and empowering for me. Right, okay. So then that was kind of the eye-opener. And so then what do we do to prepare for these students? Okay, well, we think about where are the bathrooms. While we don't have things that are technically labeled gender neutral or inclusive bathrooms, the more we explored the Winterthur campus, we realized, okay, we do have places. We have family-friendly bathrooms, single occupancy bathrooms. And so we made a very conscious choice on the very first day when we meet the incoming class in the parking lot to welcome them to Winterthur, because it's a confusing place to find your way around, that we will walk the whole class by this building that is right next to the parking lot to point out that this is one of the places that there are gender neutral bathrooms, and continue that tour through the campus, explaining where these different locations are that are available. And then the other conscious decision we made was that once we got everybody to the room where they spend most of their first year, that we would ask the class if they're comfortable to introduce themselves using their pronouns. And I think at this point, maybe Marguerite, it's time to pass it back to you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you also for giving that context. It makes me realize that some context we are leaving out of this conversation is an introduction to gender neutral pronouns and terms, which we can get into later if people have questions or offer resources, but we're kind of starting out with a basic understanding of gender neutral pronouns and using they them pronouns in the workplace. So if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out and I can make resources available. For me, my story is that I decided that I was going to come out as non-binary at graduate school, which was kind of an intense decision and was not made lightly. But I knew that it was something about myself that I needed to live authentically. And I realized that actually starting graduate school was a great opportunity to almost reset, to be able to introduce myself new and off the bat. There's all sorts of networking and different ways to identify yourself in professional spaces. And so for me, I wanted to start using they, them pronouns at the beginning of my professional career, instead of having to change it later on, which there's nothing wrong with changing pronouns in the middle of a career. For me, it felt right to start that way. But it also added a lot of stress to an already stressful situation. And I didn't know in the very beginning that I would have these folks with similar experiences and such a wonderful class of allies. So that first week of orientation, when we were asked to share our pronouns with each other, was amazing to me, because Joelle's first experience was this orientation with her employer. And for me, this orientation with my classmates was the first professional meeting that I had been asked to share pronouns in. And it was a great way to kick off this experience and gave me a lot of empowerment and strength to stick up for myself and say what I needed, because this space was made for me to do exactly that. And in that sharing, we were able to look around and hear that 2 other classmates used they, them pronouns and say, oh, hey, we can support each other. What do you need? What feels comfortable for you? Let's make that happen. And so in that sharing, we were able to connect with each other. We then looked at each other and said, we have a great opportunity to do something here as a cohort, because we are this 30% they, them. It's a rare opportunity. And because we have each other and this space and feel comfortable, we're going to share this information with the rest of our peers and the department. And so first we presented a little bit on gender neutral identities, on non-binary identities, and using they, them pronouns, just to a small group, our 10 classmates, our supervisors, and a few other faculty members, just kind of in the beginning. And that was met with love and joy and kindness and understanding, and nothing but positive attitudes. And so that led to a second presentation, kind of an expanded version to an expanded audience, the entire department and beyond, kind of on this Winterthur campus, the HR department, people within our department and beyond. And that also, in addition to giving information, also built more relationships. And since that second presentation, folks have reached out to me asking for resources or asking for more information, and kind of understanding that there are people that they can go ask their pronoun questions to if they have them. So that has been a really wonderful outcome. And then we started looking around and seeing where we needed to put pronouns. Where were there spaces for pronouns to go, and where were opportunities for us to connect with others about what our expectations are in the WUDPAC space. So I also want to just quickly point out this idea of, I think the 2 biggest things that happened in this space was someone taking space and someone making space. And by both of those things happening, not at the same time, in sequence, different people, same people, the taking space and the making space, for me, are the takeaways of the 2 sides of this experience. That it is easier to take space and advocate for my own needs when that space is made. And Joelle, correct me, but it might be easier to facilitate and make that change happen when people speak up and vocalize what they need and make their needs known.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, that if somebody lets you know that they have a need, it then becomes much easier, or not necessarily easier, but there is more motivation maybe to advocate. The other thing I think is that, Marguerite, as you pointed out, there were 3 users of gender neutral pronouns in your class, plus a class that was fully supportive, right? And in the same way, it wasn't just me in the leadership. I wasn't the only one in a leadership role who was open and interested in advocating, right? So it was me and Debbie Hess Norris, who is the chair of the Department of Art Conservation, and the whole University of Delaware leadership that was supportive and advocating, and other faculty members, right? So having those groups of supporters, I think, makes it much easier to advocate and make change, as opposed to when you're the only one on either side, on the leadership side or the advocating side, trying to make change.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah, we'll give more shout outs to my classmates later. And so I feel like at this point, our timelines, our goals kind of converge. And we realized, okay, we need to do some work. We now know that there's pronoun diversity in this group, and we need to work to make that known, accepted, to set our expectations, and to move forward from there. There were a couple of kind of obvious places, name tags that can be used in the classroom, name badges that we used when we were out and about in the world when that used to happen. Our class bios, which were standard WUDPAC procedure, we were able to add our pronouns into that introduction as well. And then one place where,
Marguerite,
Joelle, do you have a question?
Maybe just quick to add, I mean, Marguerite rolled those 3 things off like they were no big deal, right? But but actually, I think every single one of those was a introduction to somebody else about, right? Because somebody else had to make those name tags. Somebody else had to make the changes on the bios. And so each time one of those things needed to happen, you were reaching out to somebody else, advocating a little bit, explaining more, to somebody who had never heard about using they, them, somebody who had a question about, well, that's plural, not singular, you know. And so each one of those things, while they're physically maybe no big deal, there was definitely a moment of advocating behind each one of those points.
I appreciate that. So. I appreciate that. Yeah, there were also a lot of noticing places where advocacy could happen. For example, the field trip name badges became an idea when we were out and about on field trips and realized we didn't have name tags the way we did in the classroom. And so kind of by having that experience, we realized there was opportunity for growth there, and took it. So you're correct in giving those things credit, and I thank you for that. Additionally, one of the bigger projects we worked on was, as part of this first year graduate school curriculum, we bring in a lot of guest speakers to share their wisdom and knowledge in our graduate education. And part of what we did was try to set expectations when bringing, because we had been talking amongst ourselves about all of this pronoun stuff, and we're all on the same page within our cohort, within our department. And when we started bringing other people in, one concern became setting expectations beforehand so as not to surprise them, so as not to make sure that we felt comfortable with sharing our pronouns, and so that everyone was on the same page when we got started. And so, oh, here are images of the name tags. And I will also say that this fancier ceramic one on the right was given to me by a classmate whose friend is a local artist. And it's actually a really successful way that I have found to communicate pronouns in like loud situations where you don't necessarily have an introduction read to you by the Sarah Ferrone to introduce you with your pronouns. And so I've found that to be a really successful advocacy tool. Here are our bios, and I just wanted to share quickly that our class added pronouns to our names, which I'm very proud of. And the class beneath us actually came out with a second version of their bios, one in English and one translated into Spanish. And so it struck me as really interesting that this document served as that expression tool for the students coming in. And that perhaps having a tool like that for folks to express themselves and change how they need it for it to suit themselves is a good thing, because this is an option that's presented to every WUDPAC class and they can do what suits them best. And I think those are two really exciting examples of how classes have done that. Any thoughts on that, Joelle? So then the intro packet that we sent out to guests was, I think, started out of a lot of anxiety, at least for me at first, worrying that people would be upset or that people would not know what to do if someone got misgendered, or if it would disrupt the learning experience, which is not what our intention was. And so we kind of overcompensated by pouring information that we thought might come up or might potentially trigger an issue into this document that we sent out ahead of time. And so, Joelle, I'll pass it to you here to speak about the facilitator's role in handling this document.
Sure. So, and I'll just agree with you, Marguerite, that I think maybe it was your outpouring of wanting to share and do the best that we could to make people comfortable, as well as our desire as faculty, lecturers, wanting to, again, make your learning experience a positive one, but also make this whole experience positive for these guest speakers. And we bring in about 50 guest speakers a year in through this first year teaching system, right? So it was a lot of people that we wanted to find a way to communicate with in a positive way, and try to bring them in being aware and open, but also trying to bring them in a way that would be supportive of you and the class. And so I get to teach the first 3 weeks of coursework for every incoming class. And so that meant that I was the first one to share this packet. And so what we did is the class put this packet of information together. I think it was 6 pages long, right? And we went back and forth a few times about it, but then once it was good and ready to go, I sent it to the first guest speaker ahead of time. And then I called him to say, hey, did you get the packet? What do you think? And he was incredibly supportive. Yep, got it. It's great. I think it's awesome. Looking forward to it. I'll see you on Tuesday or whatever day it was. And all of the guest speakers, I think I did call most of them, and in that first couple of weeks, just to check in because it was new, and they were all incredibly supportive and pleased and happy to have the packet and have the name tags with the pronouns. And do you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Marguerite,
So,
maybe?
Yeah, so one of the reactions was generally positive, and that's kind of how it started out.
And then in the next few weeks, there were these other 3 reactions. I think the first one that we got that wasn't just, yep, thank you, was that they were very supportive of the idea, but the whole packet itself was a little overwhelming and maybe a little preachy. And I part of that, I think, had to do with the fact that we had people at very different places in their own understanding of gender neutral pronouns and gender fluidity. And so depending on where you were in your own personal evolution, you responded to this packet differently. But we got this response from somebody who was very supportive, but felt like it was a little overwhelming. And that took us back to the class to ask if we could adjust it a little bit. I think that's where that happened at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the class did adjust it, made it a little bit shorter. And we can maybe, if there's time, we can go into that a little bit more. But while we're on this slide, I just want to talk about the other 2 reactions.
Yes,
There
please.
were a couple of people who got the packet. It made them pretty uncomfortable. They registered that uncomfortableness with the professor in charge, but then once they had come and taught, the response was, the students were wonderful, you know, thank you very much. And I think it was a growing moment, a learning moment, possibly. And then we had only one that I know of, very negative response, where the initial response was, if you use this again, I won't come back and teach. But that person also had a response in the end similar to what was to letter C. So overall, the response was very positive to this packet. People were very open to it. But we did learn some things about communication. And I think, do you have a slide with the, yeah.
Yes.
So Marguerite, why don't you talk about the changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Joelle said, the next step was kind of taking that feedback, filtering it, and adjusting what we did. And so our introduction packet went from 6 pages to 3 pages. It included kind of an overview of the main questions that we normally get asked, mostly from the academic people about citations and the APA and Chicago Manual of Style. So we pointed towards that with only a couple of sample sentences or alternative words to use as opposed to many pages. And then I think the biggest thing we did was this last line that we're happy to provide additional resources upon request. So if folks are really interested and want to engage or have more questions, that we make that space for them, that they can choose to take or not. And some people did and some people didn't, but we did not get the same sort of feedback of being overwhelmed once we made these sort of changes. And I want to say that we made these changes in addition to using nameplates, name badges. When we introduced ourselves, everyone in the room introduced themselves with their pronouns. And so these things didn't happen in a vacuum, but rather work together in a really great symphony of advocacy, which is a term I just came up with, but let's use that because it's pretty great. And so all of those things together made that classroom and that learning space a really welcoming, accepting, and safe space to share. And so kind of where we ended and where this talk came from is Joelle and I were talking about the class of 2024 who started this year, who in their first round of introductions all introduced themselves with their pronouns. No questions asked, no complications, just began the process of sharing. And it's what we do now in the program. People come in and they share, and it's a human right that we recognize. And I'm very proud to have been a part of it. Joelle, any last minute closing thoughts?
Well, there's one thing that I realized that in terms of advocacy, that we haven't spoken about. There's probably more, but one that just stuck out to me. Sure. And that's the issue of correcting someone. If somebody's misgendered, which was definitely is definitely a skill that we continue to practice and continue to learn, right? And in the academic environment, figuring out when to step in and correct as opposed to when to let it go because somebody's maybe made a mistake several times in a row, they're just new at it, and they're just, even though they get it and they want to fix it, they're not finding that it comes naturally. And how do you do that and still provide an atmosphere of respect? And so I think your class was very good about correcting for each other, right? It wasn't that if you were misgendered, you didn't always have to correct it. Somebody else in the class would correct it. So it wasn't something that needed to happen only for you. Yeah. And I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And it's part of, I think, the strength of our cohort is that was something that we were able to do for one another. And it made, I think, our message stronger, our message of support that much stronger. It also took the burden off of the minority or the group, the marginalized group in that space. And part of what I was thinking about preparing for this talk was my boundaries, and if I have personal boundaries, especially in professional settings. And I'm glad you brought this up, because one thing that I definitely still struggle with is correcting people, because it is hard. Whether it's a correction about my gender or somebody else's, it still can be a hard thing to do, to step into a conversation. And so picking my battles is one thing that I've had to learn to do for my own gender. Like, if I get misgendered, I choose to pick those battles. And if I hear somebody else get misgendered, I always stand up for them. That's kind of the line I've delineated, where I feel comfortable making that decision for myself, but always support those around me. But I'm still learning. We're all still learning. And I'm glad that we have such a great group of 10 and growing to do it with.
Well, and I guess I would just add to that from a leadership standpoint, when I'm in a meeting where somebody who's not in the meeting gets misgendered, and I would say this is true for all of the faculty, we will correct in that situation always. When we're in a situation where it's like an active class that's going on, we have a guest speaker who maybe has misgendered somebody, then that becomes more of that pick your battle situation in terms of when it feels like the right thing to do or not quite the right thing to do. But when we're in a situation where there is the person who has been misgendered is not there, then standing up for that person who's been misgendered is absolutely something that happens.
I love that. I like that. Let's keep doing that. And so we have some additional kind of helpful habits to discuss, but that was kind of the end of this portion of where we discuss the process and our two journeys in it. and are happy to take any questions now about any of it.
Great. Thanks so much to both of you. This is Sarah, for those of you who are just catching up and getting acclimated to kind of the course of our time together today. We have a few comments and questions that are coming up in the chat. So I just want to kind of stop there for a second first. And I, of course, have some questions that I would love to follow up on based on some of the things you've said, especially to prepare us, right, for the conversations that we're hoping to have tomorrow, and where we may or may not have you with us. So here's a few things that have come up. There's a comment from Nyla in the chat around the idea that sometimes it's harder to correct people over Zoom. And Joelle, I can already see you nodding. Yeah, I'm wondering if we can speak to that. You said you have a whole bevy of kind of tips and thoughts around this. So let's start there, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot harder to interrupt and for all kinds of reasons on Zoom, right? And so I agree, Nyla, it is much harder to correct people, although you can use the chat, right? So you could private message somebody to say, I'm not sure you recognize this, but you misgendered so-and-so. And maybe easier to do when you know the person than when it's somebody that you've never met before in your whole entire life, right? But maybe that's one of those situations again where you need to be thinking, okay, am I doing more good or am I doing more harm in this situation by calling somebody out? And I guess that's maybe one of the things that I think about is, okay, if I call somebody out, is this going to do more harm or more good? And I'm sure I don't get it right all the time, but that's a question that I'm asking myself.
Thanks, Marguerite.
I agree with that. I think that one huge perk of the Zoom life is that you can throw pronouns in your name at the bottom of every box, and it's visible as people speak to you. And so for me, that has been a huge win. Basically the name badge idea in every single conversation we have. And so I think one way perhaps to balance those things is to take advantage of that and share your pronouns and show that it is a safe space where we pay attention to pronouns. And if somebody misgenders, it's at least in that space that is indicating that it is a pronoun conscious space. And so the correcting might not feel as harsh or out of place or misdirected if the space is built to support those. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? So I think that making space for people to share is what's important there, even in Zoom.
Yeah, that response is really interesting to me because it harkens back to what you said in the early parts of the presentation, right? This idea of there's a difference between kind of passively modeling, right? A space in which, right, we are, kind of gender inclusive and thinking about pronouns, and or actively, right, saying right off the top, this is what this space is, right? And so I'm curious too about how that has evolved, right, at the organization and with the school. It seems to me like so many organizations start in that passive space and are hesitant about moving into a proactive. But I'd be curious about how that process worked for y'all.
I haven't thought about it using that language before, but I really like that. So I'm going to take it a noodle on it going forward. But Joelle, I want to poke you in that moment of when we got feedback option D that was very negative, and it kind of triggered that internal discussion about limits. Can you speak about that?
Yeah. So when we did get this one that was like, if you use this again, I'm not going to come back and teach, and right, that caused ignited a discussion amongst the faculty about, okay, we do definitely want to do this carefully and with intent, and to try and be welcoming and inclusive of everybody in their path. But at some point, we've got to make a decision where we say, but this is what we're doing, right?
Mhm.
And so when we got to that point where somebody was saying, I'm not coming back if you continue to do this, then we got to the point where we said, well, that's the choice we're gonna have to make, right? And you can't always make everybody happy. I'm pleased to say that that person didn't choose to stay away. They have continued to come back, even though we continue to advocate for the use of pronouns. In terms of proactive versus reactive, this is very small maybe, but I now am almost always in a professional situation. When I'm asked to introduce myself, I use my pronouns. And initially I did that in a situation where I was pretty sure most other people were going to use their pronouns too. But now it's just how I introduce myself. And my thought being that even if nobody else chooses to do that, if there is somebody else, well, other people are exposed to the idea of doing it. And if there is somebody else who would like to, but maybe isn't planning to, even if they don't choose to use their pronouns, they know that somebody else in the meeting is comfortable with that idea and supportive of the idea.
Thank you. I'm curious as well, as we're kind of watching the chat, and also I'm wanting to take advantage of the specific guidance, right, that both of you can provide, right, in terms of thinking about your individual experiences with this. I'm curious, you both have mentioned this idea of what you do, right, when misgendering occurs, whether it be in regards, Marguerite, as you said, when it's about me, right, and or when I witness it kind of happening to others. And I wonder, how have you considered, or maybe how did the cohort talk about that in terms of recognizing whether people want you to assist, right? Or whether they want to be able to step into that space themselves. Are those conversations that you explicitly had? Did that awareness just come through your own personal choice? How did you consider that?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to remember because it was so long ago, but I do remember having a conversation about what do we do when it happens, because at that point it was inevitable. So when it happens, what's our game plan? And we tapped kind of our cisgender ally classmates to say it would show amazing support and solidarity if a correction came from you instead of from us, because it sends the message that you're paying attention and that you support us. And they did it beautifully. And additionally, to their credit, our cisgender classmates who also use she, her pronouns, similarly to Joelle, introduced themselves, signed their email signatures, had it on their name tags. And I think one thing to learn from that is that pronouns belong to everyone, whether you're LGBT or not. You can be cisgender and you still use pronouns. And sharing that space, sharing it whether or not you identify as LGBT, makes it a safe space and shows that you are pronoun conscious for those who are LGBT and do need that safe space. The onus doesn't fall on only the ones who are different or feel uncomfortable and have to advocate for themselves. And so to me, that's what being an ally is stepping up for and supporting kind of unconditionally. And it's been really amazing. And so I think part of our success has been those 3 non-binary people, but also those 7 really wonderful allies.
There is a longer kind of comment and question in the chat coming through from Maddie, asking specifically, Marguerite, have you noticed that there are places in your professional world, right, maybe outside of your experience at Winterthur and UDEL, that feel pretty gender exclusive? And then going forward to mention concepts like submission forms, right, that are asking you to select gender from a predetermined list rather than a more open, right, format. And are there other examples than what's coming up?
Totally. I see it all the time still, filling out forms in all sorts of settings, medical settings, education settings, tax settings, so many forms. And so I think one thing that I would encourage everyone at this session to do is just pay attention. When those things pop up in your life and you say, oh, that gender category doesn't quite make sense, and this isn't as inclusive as it could be, and this is how I would do it to make it more inclusive. So just by noticing those types of things makes you more attuned to be more inclusive later on. It's also hard to say because I've been at home for 2 years, and so the gendering of spaces has not had the same effect in my professional life as it once had. And so, Maddie, I will get back to you once we re-emerge from the COVID cocoon.
Thanks, Marguerite. And I think this is a conversation that continues to happen as well when we think about the job functions that we perform, right? The records that accompany any object that we have, right? The legacies of a historical understanding of gender, right? Rather than as gender has evolved, right? And as our understanding of gender has evolved, and what that, right, places upon us as a professional obligation as well. I want to flag that for further conversation tomorrow as we continue to come back together. Diani is now visible, which makes me say she's trying to give us a nod. We have to wrap. But I do want to just ask if we can borrow 30 more seconds at least, Diani. I'd love to just pay attention to Dale's comment in the chat. And ask if Marguerite and Joelle can take a look at that for us. Referencing the idea that someone had, refuses to share their professional knowledge unless the situation is designed, to conform to their comfort zone, i.e., I'm assuming this is in reference, to the lecturer who had said, nope, not going to do it. Seems to be an issue of their own personal standards, right? And then the question being, how do we navigate, right, the professional obligation in advance?
I have
Any
a quick
thoughts?
response. Joelle, do you have any thoughts?
Go ahead.
In our kind of preparatory questions, one that came up was thinking a little bit about challenges of navigating your own personal priorities against or within institutional priorities. And I was thinking about that in this case, and what are my personal priorities here? And my personal priorities are basic human respect. And if that is not an institutional priority, then I think there's a bigger problem, which speaks to Dale's comment of support and acceptance like this should be part of your institutional mission, and it is a professional obligation to treat coworkers with respect. So I think it's a worthwhile comment. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Marguerite. I want to prime everyone and with the hopes that you will come back and join us tomorrow. I think there's a wealth of opportunity for further dialogue and discussion around so much of what Joelle and Marguerite have shared with us today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about your own kind of thoughts and personal experiences with it. I'm really intrigued by digging into the idea of how, right, y'all stayed focused on what the desired impact was and how we as advocates for change can stay focused on what that desired impact is in the way of thinking about how y'all changed your approach in order, and were willing to do that in order to achieve the impact, which sometimes we're not willing to change, right? How we go about something in order to get to an impact. I want to sit there. I want to talk a little bit about this call out versus call in culture that you all have been kind of referencing in terms of ways of which we move forward in making change. And I think it would be so helpful for us to really explore with each other tomorrow how we speak to and react to people's hesitancy and or disregard, right? Of making these adjustments in the way that they speak to and think about pronouns and gender. Looking at, the things we often hear around religious objections, cultural objections, thinking around concepts of just grammar, right? And all of the things that we know are in the ether when we talk about these things within our organizations. And let's talk about it head on, right? And how do we think through those as a group of colleagues tomorrow? With that in mind, Diani, any closing thoughts as we wrap up our time, and with my appreciation to all of you in attendance, as well as to both Joelle and Marguerite?
Not too much. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I hate to be the person who, by turning my video on, indicate that the conversation is coming to a close, but I do want to mention to everyone that both Marguerite and Joelle have mentioned they would be welcome to receiving questions via email if anyone wants to reach out to either or both of them directly. So maybe why don't both of you, if you don't mind, just pop your emails in the chat. Perfect, thank you. So once again, as Sarah said, I want to thank you so much to Marguerite and Joelle. Thank you to Sarah as well. I also hope that everyone here as participants will also be able to join us tomorrow to discuss some of the questions and concepts that we started thinking about today. It is a separate link, which you should have in the same confirmation email where you got this one. So we will see you all at 2 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks so much.